Hello everyone, this is Yana Smakula. Welcome back to my channel. In this video, I have several card ideas to share with the new Lots of Luck stamp set from Simon Says Stamp. The minute I saw this stamp set, I thought it was super smart. And I felt inspired to create some good luck cards and cards for St. Patrick's Day. If you look on the back of the packaging, this actually shows you what these images look like once they are stamped. So this is a layering stamp set, and I think it's brilliant. So you have the 4-leaf clover, you have the 3-leaf clover, you have a clover flower, which is really smart. I've not seen this done anywhere, and I really like that flower. I think it can be used beyond the good luck cards, beyond the St. Patrick's Day. I think it would look really nice in a floral arrangement. You also have a stamp to stamp a grass, and I love the layered look here. And there's also a ladybug. I have already done some stamping. I've played around with the colors for these images, and I'll just show you real quick how I stamp these images, and then we'll jump right onto the cards. So here I have my Mini Misty stamping tool, and I'm going to start by stamping the large clover. There is a top and a bottom to this stamp. If you have the coordinating dies and if you plan to cut these images out, I recommend that you use the coordinating die as a guide. What I like to do is I position the coordinating die on my paper, I tape it in place using a piece of low-tech tape. This is the Spellbinder's Best Ever Craft tape, and I just use it as a guide for placement. So this helps me make sure I leave enough room on my paper for the stem. It makes sure that I position the first layer and then each next layer correctly so that I don't have the stem going outside the edge of my paper. And it just helps me create a better image in the end. Of course, if you are not using the coordinating die, it doesn't really matter. You can stamp these images however you want. I will also say that I won't be using the stem for the most part for my stamps, for my cards today, but I still want to make sure that I have this positioned correctly so that my stamping is done correctly. So I then close the door of my Misty, I pick up the stamp, and for this first layer, I have the Sprout ink color. I will then use Fairway and Field. And you just do your basic stamping. Stamp the first layer. I actually like to double or even triple stamp these. I do like to flip my paper around so that I can stamp multiple images in one go. And sometimes I will even have several panels of cardstock in case I want to stamp more images, because I don't really know how many images I will need. I am inspired to create several cards. I already have a few ideas in mind, so I might as well stamp several panels. And this is Nina Solar White 80-pound cardstock. So this is my go-to cardstock for anything stamping related. I have the 2 panels done. I'm going to remove this panel that I had just stamped and bring the panel that I had stamped previously. I do this because the ink on this panel has already had time to dry. It had more time to dry than on a panel that I had just finished. And when you work with the layering stamps, it matters because this gives your ink time to dry, and then you have better, crisper results when you go to stamp the next layer. Sometimes when you build a ton of color on your paper, the ink remains wet on the paper, and when you stamp the next layer, the ink just bleeds and you don't have that nice, crisp outline. I have placed the coordinating die back over my stamped image, and I'm now going to place my second layer. And it's actually very important to use the coordinating die for the second layer because this one has a stem. So I'm just looking at my stamp from different angles, trying to make sure that it is positioned correctly. I'm using Fairway ink to stamp this second layer. I love using the Simon Says Stamp Positively Saturated inks for this because they come in groupings of 3, but you can use any inks you have in your stash. If you have a favorite color combination, like 3 favorite green inks, a light, a medium, and a dark, you can definitely use these to stamp your clovers. And then we have the 3rd layer, which adds this really cool detail. And for the 3rd layer, I'm using Field ink. And again, double stamping this. I finished stamping my clovers, and I have the large one and also the small one. I stamped a bunch, and I cut them out using the coordinating dies. Now, I already have one card idea in mind, and what I want to do is I want to create a clover pattern. So here I have a panel of white cardstock. This is the same Nina Solar White. I cut a panel out using a rectangle die. I used the essential rectangles from Spellbinders. So this one is probably, it's a little bit smaller than 4 by 5 1/4 inches. I'm not sure if this panel size will work, but I just want to like pre-plan things and test my idea out. So what I want to have is I want to have a pattern of clover leaves, and I'm mixing the 2 different leaf sizes, and I just want to have 3 by probably 4. We'll see how many I can fit here. I will trim these stems on these. I don't really want to use the stems, but I don't want to trim them just yet. I want to figure out the placement first, and then if I'm happy with how everything looks, then I will trim these for my card. So let's see, maybe flip this one upside down and then add this one at the bottom. Yeah, I think that looks good, and I can probably start trimming the stems. Not quite sure how I want to trim this. If I trim it like this, does this look okay, or should I go ahead and trim it completely to the leaves? Let's see. I'm using the Spellbinders detail scissors for this, but you can use any scissors you might have. You can probably also use the stems, like add these with the stems. I just feel like I wanted to skip the stems completely and just add the leaves. Okay, so this looks great. I have already added foam adhesive from the back of each of my stamped images, and I'm just going to use that to pop these up. I have a large foam square behind the larger leaves and a small foam square behind the smaller leaves. This just makes more sense. And I only added 1 foam square behind each so that there is a little bit of a curve. I'm not sure if you can see that, but it curves slightly. And I kind of like that curve, you know, it's not a solid layer of dimension. There's just that, a bit of that curvature. And I don't know, it makes it look a little bit more interesting on the finished card. Need to reposition this one. I think I placed it a little bit too close to the edge. This is good. I am rotating the leaves, so the shadow is not at the bottom on each of these. This just gives the illusion that the leaves are all slightly different, even though I am using the same image repeatedly. But if I rotate them, it creates the look. It deceives you in a little bit. You think that these are not one and the same image. These are different. I added my panel onto an A2 tub folding card base. So it looks like this. I have some scrap panels of cardstock between the main panel and the card base so that this is popped up just a little bit. And I also have a super simple sentiment. It says, Happy St. Patrick's Day. And this one comes from the Simon Says Stamp Reverse Lucky pre-printed sentiment strips. I love those. It's been a while since I used them. And then I just used a banner die from my stash. This one is from one of the Spellbinders die sets. You can also use a paper trimmer if you don't have a die like this or a similar die. I know Simon has some banner dies that are designed specifically for these. So you can use whatever you have to cut the sentiment out. I also have a strip of foam adhesive on the back of this. And that comes from the new 3D foam strips set from Simon Says Stamp, and this one is actually pretty beefy because you have 152 strips in here, so that's a lot. I know that's going to last me a long time. I'm just looking for my T-square ruler. Here it is, to make sure that I adhere my sentiment straight onto my card. I do not want to eyeball it. I need my ruler to make sure that it is nice and centered. So let's do this. Okay, I think that looks pretty good. And I'll probably add just a couple of gems here to add some sparkle to this card. I finished this card and I added a couple of the Simon Says Stamp splash drops. I really like the clear droplets. They look like drops of water, so they kind of go really well with this card. So that's my card number 1. I also have another card. It's super simple. So I only used one clover, the larger one, and I added the Lucky to Have a Friend Like You sentiment. There's also a ladybug in the stamp set, and I stamped one and cut it out using the coordinating die. I used the lipstick red and VersaFine Onyx Black ink to stamp it, and I'm just going to add it onto my clover, just to add a little pop of color. I actually want to add another one onto this card, but I'll probably stamp it in pink. Now, before I do that, I wanted to show you how easy it is to stamp the flower that is included in this stamp set. To stamp the flower, I have discovered that I prefer to first create a template. So what I did is I used the coordinating die, and again, this only applies if you have the coordinating dies. If you don't have the coordinating dies, just go ahead and stamp it as you would stamp any other image. So if you have the coordinating dies, cut the image out, cut the blank image out, keep the negative, and I'm using the negative as a template, as a guide in my MISTI. So I'm going to pop the positive die cut into the negative, and I'm going to use it to help me align the layers. So let's start with the first layer. This is, and by the way, I forgot to mention this, but all of these are labeled. So we first stamp the clover, and we have the 1A, A2, or A1, A2, A3. The smaller one also is labeled, and it is C1, C2, and C3. Now this flower, it has a few more layers. There is a B1, we're going to stamp it now. There is B2, B3, B4, B5, and B6. And then there's the ladybug with the E1, E2, and the grass with the D1 and D2. So that makes it very easy to figure out what layer goes with which stamp set. This first layer, it doesn't really align with the outlines, so I just place it generically in the center of my panel. Let me zoom in so you can see this a little bit better. So there, you can kind of see that it's not really following the cut lines of the die cut. It's just placed in the center of this piece. And this is the trickiest because when I first stamped these flowers, I didn't have this guide. I didn't do this guide. I was just stamping as I usually stamp. And I kind of messed it up, I messed it up a few times. Actually, I did use those images, the messed up images. I still, they still looked okay. They just weren't perfect. But as I stamped more of those, I decided that I needed to have a guide, and then the guide makes it a lot easier to stamp the image correctly, to make it look as good as possible. Okay, so we stamped the first layer. You can see, totally not following the, the cut lines. I'm going to grab the second layer now. The second layer is this one, and with this layer, these two parts kind of nestle into the top part of the die cut. So let's take a look. Okay, I think that looks good. So I'm going to use my second ink color. By the way, I used bubblegum for the first layer. I'm going to use sweets for this second layer. You will need 4 colors of ink because there are 4 layers for this flower. And I'm using the 3 from Simon's, well, I'm using all inks that are from Simon Says Stamp, but I'm using a grouping of 3 inks. So I have bubblegum, sweets, and taffy. And then for the 4th layer, I'm bringing in a color from a different color combination or, you know, color family to complete that look. Okay, let's do the B3 and try to align this on. Okay, so again, I used the die cut as a guide to help me position this layer. You'll see this better once I stamp it. And then we just have the B4 to stamp. In this one, I find that it doesn't really align with anything, so I just place it generically in the center and stamp it. I'm using the Cabernet ink. It's one of the newer colors from Simon Says Stamp. It's like a wine red kind of ink. And I feel like it finishes this color combo nicely. So with that done, I can now begin stamping my stem. And the stem only has 2 layers. Let me move the magnet over here. So for the stem, again, I'm using the guide to help me position and align this layer. Okay, this looks good. And I'm using 2 colors of ink, the 2 darker green. So that is Fairway and Field. I'm double stamping to have a solid ink coverage. Okay, this looks good. And now I just have that little detail left to do, and using the Field color for the detail layer. And ta-da! Our little flower is finished. I think it looks really pretty, and I can't wait to try and combine this with other flowers and other foliage that I have in my stash. But not in this video. In this video, I'm just playing with the stamp set, you know, to get a feel for it and, you know, just to have fun, just to create a couple of St. Patrick's Day cards. I have already stamped a bunch of these and I have already made a card. So here is my card. I created a custom pattern. I have, or like a custom background. It's not really a pattern. It's just a full background. I use the Simon Says Stamp Midnight Green cardstock for the background. So it's that nice dark green. And then I added the clovers and the clover flowers in different colors of ink. So I have this same color. I also have some that were stamped in orange. Let me grab those colors so that I can show them to you guys. Okay, let's see. So some that were stamped in yellow. For the yellow colors, I used the Lemonade, Sunbeam, Citrine, and Mandarin. And then for the peach flower, I think I used the following. So peachy, grapefruit, mandarin, and sherbet. I think I probably went like this. So these are the ink colors that I used to stamp the flowers, and I love the way this looks. So here's a look at the cards I have for you, created with a lots of luck stamp set from Simon Says Stamp. I think it's a fabulous set for St. Patrick's Day, but also a great set that can be used beyond this holiday, you know, especially the flower. I think it will work really well with other foliage and other florals that we all have in our stash. Thanks so much for joining me today. Love you guys, and I'll see you next time.